Alright, this is an episode that is going to be very, very vague because it goes into a lot of detail that needs to be broken apart. But it's about stuff that we don't necessarily like to talk about, but it's the mistakes that we do that don't help our uh, reactive dogs. So this is an episode more about what we need to do and understand our shortcomings and how to become better dog owners and helpers to help our reactive dogs. So the most common problems that I have, and this is not all of them, but these are the most common, is that people do not know how to listen to their dog. Listening to their dog is, in past episodes, I explained that as the pressure that your dog feels, the harder it is for the dog to think. So when the pressure's low, they think best. When it goes higher, it's good. Then it gets hard, and then we get into that little bad spot, which is a panic zone where the dog feels like they can still think, but just enough where they feel like they have to make a decision. It's impulsive, panic-filled, and it's just a leap of faith. And that is their attempt to stop them from having their fuse pop. Because when their fuse pops, then they go into anxiety, and it's like a little pebble on top of a snowbank. Once when it hits, it goes down, and it just spirals out of control into a very disturbing, scary, and frightening situation for your dog. So they try desperately not to be in that situation. So learning how to listen to your dog, I told you that if you go ahead and you make a list of everything that your dog does as it has going through life and it sees situations it doesn't like, meaning that on the list you'll see things like the panting, the drooling, the licking of the lips, the moving of the jaws, the eyes dilating, eyes opening, squinting, blinking, ears up, ears down, ears twitching, muscles on the skull, twitching, contracting, the tail up, tail down, tail sideways, crunching, hackles up. There's a zillion different ways that the dog tries and communicates with you. So if you do that and you see that and you write down all those symptoms that you see, you'll actually have like a countdown to destruction. So before your dog gets in a situation that's bad, you can actually pull them out of it. So it's really important for you to understand what your dog is trying to communicate to you on how they're doing it. The next thing is understanding triggers. It's the next step to this. You understand that your dog's having a problem and you know when to take them out. But you start having triggers that you don't quite understand. And it's a very frustrating thing for me because I'll have people come up to me and they're like, my dog is scared of people. And I'm like, well, that person's scary, so let's make him scary. Oh, scary. Or my dog is scared of, dogs. Okay, so what I want to know is why. Dogs are not just scared of dogs or scared of people. There's reasons why. And when I talk to people, they try and tell me these things, and it's very frustrating. So I have to kind of take it in more in a human concept and put it in terms of how you talk to a person. So when you come up to me and you tell me that your dog is scared of dogs, the dog is scared of other dogs, I'm like, why? Why is it scared of dogs? And you say, well, it's just scared of dogs. And I'm like, well, when you tell me that, it means that you're not listening to your dog. You're not taking time to understand this, and you're not trying to figure out why. So in human terms, when you sit there and you say, my dog's scared of dogs, it's the same as you telling me that you want me to come over for dinner. And I say, well, where do you live? And you say, I live on Earth. I'm like, okay, that helps. Where on Earth? And you say, Earth. And I'm like, okay, well, I need a little more help than that. So just like with the dogs, when you sit there, I'm like, Earth, well, where on Earth? Then you say, well, he's scared of big dogs. And I'm like, okay, so he's scared of big dogs. That's the same as you telling me that you live in the United States. I'm like, that's not really helping me. Does that make sense? Then when you're sitting there telling me that he's scared of big dogs in parks, I'm like, okay, so it's like you telling me that you live in California. Okay? I want you to come and have dinner with me in California. Well, California is a big state, so that's like you telling me that. And then it's like, and then you say, well, he's on a leash. And that's the same as you telling me that you live in like Riverside, or no, Southern California. Southern California. SoCal. And I'm like, okay, well, then that's like that. Do you understand where we're going with this? Is that there's variables in where I live. I live, Riverside. I live in Southern California. I live in Riverside. I live on West Side. I live in a house, and this is the address. There's a lot of variables to figuring out the answer. And it's the same thing with dogs. Just because your dog is scared of dogs, big dogs, in the park with the leash, well, my question is what sounds. My question when I go into there is what the variables. Is it a noisy park? Is it a quiet park? Are there people with bicycles? Are there people with skateboards? Are there people with is there a lot of trees? Is there a lot of shadows? Is there water stream? Is there birds? And then the next thing I want to know on the leash, or is the dog on a tight leash? Is the dog on a loose leash? Are you pulling on the leash? Do you have a choke chain, a prong collar, electric? Is it a flat collar? Is it a harness? Do you have one of those like scrunchy little cords? I want to know. And then like with the big dogs, I want to know, well, does he have problems with all big dogs? Does he have problems with all little dogs? So when you're sitting there and you're learning how your dog is talking to you, you can go ahead and say, like, if you have a Adobe, a Malinois, a Shepherd, a Saint Bernard, you have a Corso, a Rottie, and you have a Collie, you have a Dane, you have a Wolfhound, a Greyhound. These are all big dogs. And if you sit there and you watch your dog as each dog passes and you say, okay, the Greyhound's going and he's down here, you can sit there and say, well, it's not the Greyhound. The Irish Wolfhound comes, he goes, is a little bit concerned. Well, Greyhound and Irish Wolfhound kind of look the same, but he has a problem. But then when the Dane goes by, he doesn't have a problem. So then you're like, well, it's not a Dane. And then the Collie goes by and he's down here and it's not a Dane. Then he's like, the Corso and so on. You start getting clues that he's having problems with certain breeds, certain breeds. And then you can say, well, what's the common variable between these particular breeds, which he seemed to have reactions to? Why are they different? So when you talk about that, it's the same as me having somebody say, well, he has problems with parks. What type of parks? Is there a skate park in there? Is there rollerbladers? Is there bicycles? Is there motorcycles? Is there sound from the freeway? These are all variables to learning how to understand and listen to your dog. It's very, very important. The next thing to understand is that when your dog is thinking, it's good here. But if you get in a situation that's here or here, it's fine. But you know why it's fine? Because you're smart enough to, when you're here, you get out instantly. You're here, you get out instantly. Learn to abort, okay? You don't sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to head and just stay here and compound the issue by staying there because my dog can't think. So even though I'm not moving or doing anything, I'm staying there. And it's just compounding and compounding and compounding because a dog can't think. You need to get out of the situation so your dog is no longer compounding the issues. Another thing that's very stressful for me is in later episodes we will learn what A minus C equals B. And what that is you have an amount of pressure that your dog can handle. So let's just say there's a dog in a park, he's not doing anything, he's on a leash, This certain amount of distance from that dog, the dog is good. When he hits this point, he acts reactive. That means that your dog is thinking, correct? When your dog gets to the orange side, you have a choice. What I would prefer you to do is not push that and go back and let your dog think. In later steps, I'll show you how we fix B. But the bigger thing of it is you can't figure out what A is, you can't figure out what B is, and you can't figure out what C is. C is a total amount of pressure from here to here. Okay? So you can't figure out what C is if you can't figure out what A is, and you can't figure out what B is if you can't figure out. So what you have to do is first learn how to listen to your dog, learn how to abort, and you have to learn how not to compound the issues. So when you understand where your dog is comfortable, then you can go ahead and say, well, how hard is this going to be? So the distance between A and B, C, this is C, what the dog sees is going to be where you need to work on. Do you get that? You start at A, this is a good place to be, and then you have an object that you want to accomplish, which is what the dog sees, and you want them to succeed in it. Then you have to figure out where you need to be, what you need to fix in the situation. What I have happen a lot of times, which is compounding the issue, and we will go in this in great detail, but the dog is at, let's just say, 30 pounds of pressure here, and the whole pressure here is the total amount of pressure for the whole C is 100 pounds of pressure, and the dog sees it. So if you would work on trying to build the dog's confidence, you can remain that being at 100. But what people do is they pick up their fluffy puppy and they pick them up and they walk over and they force the dog to see them. So every time that you get closer in this, you're adding more pressure. 10, 10, 10, 10. And then if the dog makes contact with them, then if it's not good, like if the dog jumps on them, then the dog is now at 30, and if the dog attacks them, you're at 60. So what happens is you got 60, 90, 130. You add 130 pounds more pressure from these accidents. It makes that 130, which makes this new total 230 pounds of pressure. So what happens by your mistake of not working and listening to your dog, you add these variables of pressure onto your dog. So now, instead of me having to work with something that's only 100 pounds of pressure, you force me to work in a situation of trying to fix 230 pounds of pressure with the dog. Every time the dog sees another dog, he never knows if you're going to drag him over there and make him go see the dog. So it's the same thing as with the people. People is a little bit more easier to explain, because with my fearful dogs, that's what I have happen a lot. The people sit there and say, okay, my dog's at 30 pounds of pressure. I'm going to pick up my Fluffy and walk him over there. So there's 10, 10, 10. Oh gosh, very close. Then he's going to pet me, so then there's another 20. Then they're going to make the guy pick me up. That's 40. So 40, and then pet me some more in his arms. So there's 40, 70, 90, 100, 120. So then you made the situation 120. So now, every time you go for a walk and the dog sees somebody come in the house or the park or near him, he's wondering, is it going to be 100 pounds of pressure, or is it going to be 220 pounds worth of pressure? Just by you not understanding and respecting this, you make my life and your dog's life very, very hard. So that is learning not to compound issues in your dog. Another thing is your dog might have issues with a bulldog. Now, nothing wrong about bulldogs, but if you have a dog that has never seen a bulldog and has lived with pointy noses and regular, blockheads, they're not going to know what to do with a bulldog, because a bulldog comes in and goes and it's very similar to maybe a growl in another dog. And what will happen is a dog will see this dog coming up to him, and he'll be like, I don't know what you are. I'm confused by you. So let's just say that this is a normal dog that likes dogs, and he's here, and he's coming all the way over here, and he's like, I really want to see this dog because this bulldog's here. I don't really want to see him, but I'm really concerned. And you have that little bit of area of red that he doesn't know. And then instead of letting him figure it out the right way, and I'll explain later what the right way is, you drag him over there, and then the bulldog, jumps forward to say hi, as a way a bulldog would, because, they're very energetic in their ways of saying hi. And then the dog goes, oh my God, something bad happened. So what happens is now this turns into being more. You have to learn how to not compound issues. and how to help your dog learn how to associate with stuff. So the dogs that I have shown bulldogs to, they have no problem. But whenever I do like little group events and somebody comes in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, my dog's scared," I'm like, "It's just a bulldog." Or like with Dobies. Dobies, I always say that they act like drunken hockey fans. They just run each other into the walls and stuff, and herder dogs kind of go over on the back, and there's just behaviors that are in different breeds that other dogs don't understand. So you can have something very simple like, "Hey, he breathes funny, it doesn't mean anything," and if you introduce it the right way, the dog won't have a problem. But if you decide to try and force the issue or try to compound the issue and something goes wrong, then you actually make the problem worse. So learning how to not compound issues is crucially important, because a lot of dogs, they don't go from being cute fluffy little kids to turning into dogs with bite histories in one day. There's a lot of things that happen and a lot of things that could have happened to stop it. So even though you get to a situation where your dog becomes reactive, it doesn't mean it's in all. But it's important for you to understand how your behavior and what you do can make the problem worse. And we'll go into that all. Balancing reaction to reaction. So in past things, I talked about how we have the fight, the flight, and then we have the fight. And then we have this, and this, and this, and this is the pressure. And this is what you do, the force that you need to do it. Now, the important thing for you to understand is there's no such thing as too much or too little of anything. There's a balance that you need to have. So when your dog is doing something and he is doing this much of going this far into reaction, then your reaction, either by hugs or kisses or by correction, should be here. Okay? But if your dog is here and you're down here, it's imbalanced. You're using too much force with not enough. So now there is a good way and a bad way of doing things, and you can do the bad way with both. If your dog is doing this and you're grabbing them up and hugging them and squeezing them and you're telling them they're like the precious little thing in the whole wide world, you're using too much here with not enough here. You should be using that when he's up here. If you're using corrections and you're over here, that is unfair. You're using too much force and you're actually making more problems. So it's important when working with people is that they understand what is necessarily the balance. And another issue when we go into corrections, where you're trying to do a reaction to an action, it doesn't always have to be hugs and kisses. It doesn't always have to be like bringing out the a choke chain or yelling at them. Actions to reactions is based on what they do. So let's put it in human terms, okay? So if you have a child and their bedtime is, they have to come home at 5:30, okay? 5:30. That's when they're supposed to be in the house, and that is their time to be in. If they come in at 6 o'clock, you'd probably do something a little bit different. Like you maybe just have a talk, but nothing else. Like, "Why are you not in?" If they come at 7 o'clock, well, you're going to have a little bit more talk with them. It's going to be a little bit more sterner, like you're an hour and a half late. If they come home at 9 o'clock, I'm sure you would have more.
It's lunchtime. Make sure to drink water.
You would have more. Does that make sense? And then when they come home at 11 o'clock, you would have more of a talk with them. And if they come home at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure you would have much more force with them. And if they come home with a police officer escorting them home, I'm sure you would have much more. So we do that with the dog, with the kids, but you need to do that with the dog. So when the dog makes a mistake, like they come home, they do something and it's like perfect, then the amount of correction or reward would be only that much. So you wouldn't reward a kid for coming home at 5:30 all the time. You might reward the kid if they came home earlier. But you have a balance. So when your dog does something slightly wrong, a little, slightly more, a little bit more, slightly more, a little bit more, slightly more, slightly more. But you don't go ahead and you don't treat your dog, your kid like this when they come home at 5:30. Same thing with a dog. You have to learn to have balance. You cannot just fly off the deep end because your dog does something. You have to train yourself into being balanced where you can go up and you can go down, up and go down. So when your dog goes up, you go down. And that goes back into my electric fence comment that I made. So when your dog and you are going, when your dog is going and behaving and then misbehaving and doing all this stuff, you do not want to be that person. Because what's the reward for being good, being down here and acting up? And if she's way up here, what's the point, okay? So it's just like with your kid. If you have the kid coming in and he has an appointment, he has the 5:30 and the 6 and the 7 and the 8 and the 12 and the 6. If you sit there and you tell him that you give him this much correction for here, this much talk, and then this much talk, you see how it builds up as it keeps going? And you keep having this talk. If you do that, then there's a balance. But if you go ahead and you just have the same talk, so if you have the same talk, if he's 5:30, 6:30 to 7 or 9, then if he's going out with his friends and having pizza, then he knows he's not going to be home by 6. Then what's the benefit of him not staying and having an extra slice of pizza and going and watching a movie? Because the consequence is the same. It's the same with dogs. You got to have, when your dog is going like this, in his behavior, you need to be fair and you need to be with them. Okay? So when they're doing something really good, you're giving them that. And when they're doing something really wrong, they're doing that. Now, we get into the debate on what is right and wrong, and with corrections and praise. Praise and correction is based on the dog. There's dogs who will give their life for a cookie, and there's dogs who will give their life for some praise, and then there's dogs who are egotistical. So what you use as far as balancing a reaction is based on what works for the dogs. I have dogs that don't work for food and will not work for any type of negative. They are egotistical, and I just basically use that against them. The more they succeed, the more I'm just awed by them, and the more that they fail, I'm just astonished. And those dogs work for me. Dogs who work for food, I take their food away from them, I give them food. The dogs who, are stubborn and stuff, I learned how to work around that by giving them what they need and what they want and taking away what they need and they want. You don't have to use the same tools, but the most important thing is learning how to balance your reaction to your action. The next thing is enabling. Enabling is a huge issue for me. You get the people who smother their dogs. So you need to let your dog think. It doesn't do me any good, or you, to know how this works if you don't let your dog think. You have to take your dog and show them a problem. So when they're right here and you're showing them a problem, they build confidence and they learn how to move further and make this bee become smaller and learn how to get all the way to 100%. But if you're grabbing your dog every time it wants to think and smothering it or picking it up or cradling it and you don't let it think, you're not helping it. Or just like in the future when I'm going to start talking about trick training, you can't take your dog and manually force them into a sit or a down. It's not the point of teaching your dog how to do tricks. The reason for I telling people to teach your dogs how to do tricks is for the dog to learn how to think and how to problem solve, how to gauge and work with this, how to take this and turn it down to this. So by allowing the dog to think and succeed and fail and not just smother it, it'll make the dog learn how to push itself and become stronger. So instead of being 30 pounds of pressure, it does this at 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. But if you smother your dog and you keep them always at 30, they're never going to succeed. And sometimes you actually make the problem worse because they lose confidence in themselves. And then also you want to look at with enabling, you believe the worst. So when the dog sits there and he sees a person and he's at 30 pounds worth of pressure and his owner is freaking out, going, "Oh my God, there's a person!" Ah, starting to run away and pulling on the leash and tensing. The owner is telling the dog that this is bad, even though the dog doesn't see anything bad. He's like, "Well, I take confidence in you." So enabling works opposite there too, because by your own fear and anxieties of past references and history, you're shooting uh, energy into your dog that's not necessarily true. So you actually become part of the equation. When people say my dog is scared of a dog, and I'm like, scared of a dog or scared of people, I'm like, well, can you explain that? And they're like, oh, well, they're men, and that's all I know. That's like you telling me that you live on Earth. It's not the same thing. Sometimes the variable that people don't want to understand is actually you. You fearing the anxiety, you seeing something, and you gearing and telling the dog. These are all variables that we have to understand. The other thing is people pretend that they don't see a problem. So when the dog is going on those reactions, remember where we have the reaction and this, they don't want to correct the dog, they don't want to correct the dog, so they pretend like they don't see the problem happening. So what they do is they allow the dog to build further and further and further and further up to here and make a correction, and then they're like, well, I only want to give a correction right here. And they fail because they pretend it doesn't happen, and then they can't be any more stronger than that, and it doesn't work. So if they would catch the dog when he was down here, they could do that force. So these are usually people who are very sensitive to their dogs and don't want to tell their dogs no. If you tell your dog from here to here,